Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. Losing Jim was the hardest thing I've ever been through. We had been together since high school and married for 20 years. He was the love of my life and my best friend. When he passed suddenly from a heart attack at only 42 years old, I didn't think I could go on. The only thing getting me through the grief was our beautiful daughter Hannah, who just turned 16. She was devastated to lose her daddy, and we leaned on each other for support. Jim and I never had life insurance since we were so young, but he did have a huge inheritance coming from his grandparents' estate that was worth around $3 million. Since I was his wife and sole heir, that money would be the only financial security Hannah and I had left after Jim died. Jim's parents, Roger and Sylvia, never really approved of me from the start. They thought I wasn't good enough for their perfect son. Even after 20 years of marriage, they still treated me like an outsider and caused problems any chance they got. I hated that their shitty behavior upset Jim, but he always stood up for me. Now that he was gone, I worried they would try to cut me out of the inheritance somehow. 2 days after Jim's funeral, right when Hannah and I were at our lowest, Roger and Sylvia showed up unannounced at our house. "We need to have a discussion about the estate," Roger announced gruffly as they barged in. Alarm bells instantly went off in my head. "This isn't a good time. Hannah and I are still grieving," I said firmly, ready to show them out if needed. "We'll make it quick then. Due to the circumstances, Sylvia and I don't think you're fit to be the sole heir anymore," Roger declared coldly. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "Circumstances? Jim just died. We're devastated. What the hell are you talking about?" Sylvia sneered. "Well, it's clear you drove our son to an early grave with all your demands. We don't think you deserve that inheritance after how you treated him." My vision went red with rage. These delusional a-holes had the audacity to accuse me after I spent 2 decades loving their son. "Get out of my house before I call the police. You have no claim to that money and you're not welcome here." They refused to leave, continuing their absurd tirade about how I was an unfit mother and wife. I'd had enough. I dialed cops and reported the trespassing. When the cops showed up, Roger and Sylvia finally scuttled away, but not before threatening to take me to court. "Just try it! You'll get laughed out so fast!" I shouted after their retreating forms. Hannah was in tears after hearing their crazy accusations. I held her close, heartbroken all over again. How could they hurt us so badly right after losing Jim? Their audacity knew no bounds. A few days later, I got a notice that Roger and Sylvia had indeed filed a motion in probate court, contesting the inheritance based on the ridiculous claim that I caused undue stress to Jim prior to his death. I knew I had to lawyer up ASAP. Thankfully, my friend Sarah is an estate lawyer, and she was furious on my behalf. "Don't worry, we're going to crush them," she vowed. The next few months leading up to the court date were absolute hell. Roger and Sylvia started harassing me nonstop with nasty emails and voicemails, calling me a gold digger, whore, and terrible mother. They even sent CPS to my door for a welfare check after falsely claiming I was an unfit parent. It was a blatant intimidation tactic, and I was terrified they would try to take Hannah away too. When the day finally came, I took the stand prepared with a thick file of evidence to disprove every one of their lies. Sarah methodically picked apart their testimony, exposing massive holes and inconsistencies, but the final blow came from Hannah herself. At Sarah's request, Hannah told the judge about all the Christmases and birthdays her grandparents ruined with their hurtful comments and bullying behavior towards me and Dad. "They made my parents miserable. I just want my mom to be taken care of since Dad is gone," she said, her soft voice carrying through the silent courtroom. You could see the jury melt at her words. During cross-examination, Sarah asked Roger point blank, "Do you have any proof at all that the deceased didn't intend for his wife to inherit?" He tried to sputter out excuses, but had nothing concrete, just baseless accusations. The judge wasn't having it. In her closing statement, Sarah emphasized that Jim made his intentions abundantly clear over 20 years of marriage and supporting me as his wife and mother to his daughter. On the other hand, Roger and Sylvia provided zero evidence and only malicious claims. It didn't take long for the jury to return with a unanimous victory in my favor. We left the courthouse holding on to each other, crying tears of relief. I could finally start to heal after months of hell at Roger and Sylvia's hands. But the best moment was yet to come. As we walked to the car, Hannah said loudly, "Maybe now those nasty grandparents will leave us alone," right as Roger and Sylvia were passing by. Their faces turned purple with rage, but they couldn't do a thing about it. We drove away laughing at their expense. With the inheritance secured, Hannah and I were able to buy our dream home, a spacious cabin right on a beautiful lake, with no nasty neighbors for miles. It's been our peaceful sanctuary ever since as we've rebuilt our lives after losing Jim. I'll always miss him deeply, but finding this place and cutting off his toxic parents has brought me the closure and security I so desperately needed. Hannah is thriving with her new start. All it took was standing up to delusional bullies dead set on destroying us. I'm just grateful the law was on our side in the end. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Preface. In early 2020, I was hired under the title Assistant Manager at a local automotive shop. We mainly sold tires, or tires if you're American, and alloy wheels for passenger vehicles. The company owned several stores. I reported directly to my manager, who then reported to the owner of the company. Shortly after I was hired, I noticed the behavior of the manager was far from professional. He would constantly mock and berate me for being the new guy. I believe part of this was jealousy and insecurity on his part, as I ended up recording more sales under my name within the first few months. He would also knock off work early and start drinking beer while the rest of us continued to work. I remember when he found out that I participated in MMA training sessions after work. He tried to goad me into a fight for his own amusement. Clearly, this guy didn't like me, and I was starting to get the feeling that he was trying to get me to snap or lose my cool, and as a result, my employment. I became even more certain of that with what happened next. Story. During the few months that I had worked there, I had noticed that our takings for the day and sales records did not match. I would often spend half an hour to an hour after work trying to figure out where the errors were coming from, while the manager would simply throw his hands in the air and exclaim that he had no idea how this was happening. The recurring issue seemed to be that our cash takings had been recorded incorrectly. There would sometimes be an excess amount of cash that didn't match up with what was recorded on our sales invoicing software. Other times, there would be less. I was at the time an accounting student studying toward my bachelor's degree. I was already suspicious of the cash being out each day. However, given how the manager had been treating me up until this point, I was concerned that any complaint would somehow be twisted and used against me. And boy, was I right. Several weeks later, my manager took some time off. During this time, I managed a personal record in-store sales and also noticed something interesting. The cash was never out at the end of each shift. I reported this directly to the owner of the company. Given I was acting manager during the time my manager was away, I was expected to report to the owner every day and explained what had been occurring while the manager was there. In all honesty, I was hopeful that the owner would be having a word with the manager about the discrepancies. However, I was also wary, as I believed once the owner spoke to my manager, that the manager would immediately know it was me who reported this. When the manager returned to work, he immediately approached me with a disgruntled look on his face. "I've spoken with the owner. You tried to blame me for the discrepancies? You should focus on doing your job properly. Then this wouldn't happen." I was quite taken aback by how angry he was, though. I wasn't surprised that he twisted it and tried to place blame on me. Given his reaction, I'm even more suspicious at this point. He wants me to do my job properly, eh? Malicious compliance ensues. That same week I got to work. I started paying attention to what customers were paying when they were dealing with my manager. Behind his back, I began examining all of his sale transactions and invoices with a fine-tooth comb. As the days rolled by, I started to find evidence of his dishonesty. When it came to a few cash sales, my manager was doing the following. Example, would tell the customer the price is $200 if he pays cash. Would discount the price by $50 in the sale invoicing software. Would put the extra cash into the till and record a $150 cash sale. Before we did the cash up at the end of the day, he would sneakily pocket this extra cash while no one was around. Though he was very foolish, as he clearly couldn't remember the exact amount he had swindled. Hence why the cash would be up some days, didn't swindle enough. Or the cash would be down, swindled too much. And I took screenshots of the discounts he had been giving on sales and sent them to the business owner, along with a report. A report with a detailed description of my findings. The report also showed that on all days he wasn't there for the cash count, there was no variance. When he was there, well, the owner was infuriated. This man had been his trusted employee for years. The owner was so infuriated, in fact, that he ordered my manager to do a mandatory drug test, pee in a cup style, on the same day he found out. And no surprises? He failed. Turns out the manager had quite the meth habit. This was most likely his sole motive for stealing cash, and the owner was beside himself. We operate machinery every day in this store, and so the thought of a manager walking around high as a kite wouldn't sit well with any health and safety professional. In fact, it could have landed the owner in serious legal trouble if any accident or injury occurred under this manager's watch. The manager was terminated immediately for the violation of his contract and was later taken to court by the owner in an attempt to recover the stolen funds. The next one is a petty revenge story. Several years ago, my father-in-law was on a downward health slide, so my wife, our 2 kids, and I moved into his house to remodel it and help take care of him. The house had been gutted by fire about 20 years before and had sat in a state of, "we'll get to it," as he lived in the mother-in-law apartment attached to it. One of the first days I was there, the neighbor came up to me and started talking negatively. He thought I was the contractor, and he was basically telling me that the people here couldn't afford to pay me. I let it slide and didn't correct him. After all, I was the one doing the work. But after a few weeks, he saw me leaving for work and figured it out. I had a large dumpster brought in and placed on the lawn, as many do during a remodel. The lady I had dealt with to get it called me about an hour after it had been dropped off to say there had already been someone calling them to complain about it, but things were all handled properly. It was only there for a week and was picked up on the next trash cycle, but she still received calls daily. During this time, I found that his old recycling containers had been thrown over the fence with trash in them about a year or 2 before. So this person had been throwing trash into his sick, elderly neighbor's yard for who knows how long. And now it was my mess to deal with. Having had worse neighbors, I grew up next to a double murderer. I just put it all in the dumpster. I finished the remodel, cleaned up the yard, and even created a spot where I could park an old pickup and restore it with my father-in-law as a guide. 2 days after the truck showed up, city enforcement came by about a complaint regarding the truck being on an unimproved surface. So I improved the surface by adding gravel. They then came out a week or 2 later to make sure I had made the improvements. When the code enforcement officer let slip that the grumpy guy next door must really have it out for you, I realized I had had enough. I copied his business name and address off his truck. I went and got a $25 Visa gift card and set it up to donate $1 a month in his name, with his home address and business name and address attached to it, to the Church of Scientology. Sure, I was giving some money to a cult, but I felt it was worth it. Now I had no way of telling how well it worked, but he's moved since then. The new neighbor is super nice, and she has asked about the previous people being Scientologists, as she had received a couple of weird magazines and newsletters for the previous owners. I hope they still have his business address. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I work in a food catering place that can fulfill allergy-free requests. We have the expertise and care not to include allergic food, either as a hidden ingredient or by accidentally sharing contaminated utensils and pans while cooking. In our experience, the 4 most common allergies are peanuts, tree nuts, eggs, and milk. Cooking meals without these 4 ingredients will usually satisfy everyone at an event. We had a new client, a food allergy advocacy group. They ordered a large catering last month and didn't pay us since. We were out of pocket $2,000 and were considering legal action. This charity had the nerve to place another order with us, but this time a smaller one costing $450. The group asked for the meals to be nut-free vegan instead of nut/egg/milk-free, as this would ensure them a peanut, tree nut, egg, and milk-free event for cheaper, as they would avoid our additional allergy-free preparation fees. This was reckless behavior from the advocacy group, as the party attendees were most likely anaphylactic to milk and egg. Think deadly peanut allergies, but for dairy, milk, cheese, cream, and egg products instead. Had we not known they were a food allergy charity, then we would not have taken as much care in ensuring the meals were egg/dairy free, and would have just focused on the nut-free angle instead. There was one important thing the charity forgot. It's now possible to buy dairy made from lab-grown milk from yeast. The protein is identical to milk, but is technically vegan. We cooked all the meals with this lab-grown dairy and loaded it into the van. Upon arriving at the function hall, we informed the charity organizers that the meals had lab-grown dairy in them. The charity owner started blasting off on how it was meant to be dairy-free and how they have people deathly allergic to milk at the event. I simply explained that the order was nut-free vegan since we used lab-grown milk, and that they had failed to pay us for the last order, and that this was simply going to be our team Christmas party if they didn't accept the order. The owner went ballistic and began pushing me. The rest of us restrained him, and the function hall called the police. The owner lied and told the police that we had dropped and assaulted him. The police asked the function hall for the CCTV and then moved us both along. The police did inform us of the commotion that we could head down to the station tonight and provide a witness statement should we wish to press charges. A few moments later, the owner called and begged for an apology and offered to pay us both the original and today's invoices right there and then. I decided to accept the apology and the cash. Our team had a nice pre-Christmas party with the vegan lab-grown dairy meals. The next one is an entitled people story. Maybe I'm the entitled person here, but I think I deserve to be treated with some decency, treated like a human with some basic kindness, dignity, and respect. I am homeless, and I have a story. About a week ago, I burned my hand somewhat badly. It was my own dumb mistake. I have a small camp stove I use for cooking, and I had just finished with it. My dumbass took my food off, turned it off, and grabbed it to put away. I literally grabbed the metal part the pan rests on, forgetting metal plus fire equals sign hot. I did everything I could to take care of it. I washed my hands a lot. I kept cleaning it off with isopropyl alcohol and polysporin to help it heal, but my best efforts weren't enough. I developed an infection, and I knew I needed treatment. Instead of going to the emergency room, I found a walk-in clinic. I waited my turn to see the doctor, and when I finally got in to explain what I needed, he basically refused to help me. He said he wouldn't be prescribing anything, and I'd just have to deal with the pain, accusing me of intentionally burning myself for drugs. I tried to say I just needed antibiotics because my hand was infected. Well, I got nothing, and I knew the infection was bad. I was unable to close my hand, it was getting very swollen. Just an FYI, I don't drink, I don't use drugs, I'm on the straight and narrow path. So I left, and it was off to the emergency room because I needed treatment. I went and explained to the ER nurse what happened, that I think I need antibiotics, and was put in the waiting room for 6 hours. Finally, I was taken back into a smaller waiting room, where I waited for another 3 hours. Finally, a doctor came, but what bothered me was he had 2 very large security guards behind him. The doctor didn't ask me what's wrong. He immediately said, "Unfortunately, we can't prescribe you any medication," and basically tried to usher me out of the door. Duck, yeah, I know I look rough, but I'm not a tweaker, and I kinda got really mad and raised my voice. I said very sternly, "I don't want your ducking drugs, I want ducking treatment." I slammed my hand very hard down on the metal table thing they have in the rooms and said, "I have an infection. I burned myself on my camp stove. I have my stove in my bag. You can see little burned pieces of my flesh still on it. I just need you to take a look, Marie. Give me some antibiotics because I don't want to have to cosplay as Captain Ducking Hook for the rest of my life." Me slamming my hand on the table alerted the security. They said if I have another outburst like that, they're going to hold me and get the police involved. Luckily, the doctor finally got it through his head I wasn't a junkie, and took a look at my hand. He ended up giving me a needle in my hand because it was very infected, as well as a blister pack of antibiotics, enough for 7 days. He said if it's not better in a week to come back. But seriously, am I being entitled? Do I not have the right to be treated like a human? Okay, and my hand is feeling a lot better. The swelling has gone down. The next one is an entitled parent story. I've been a fan of this subreddit for a while, and I finally have my own story to contribute. This happened last week during my evening commute. I work in the city and usually take the bus home. As anyone who commutes knows, these buses can get packed, especially during rush hour. On this particular day, I managed to snag a seat, which felt like winning the lottery after a long day at work. I had my earbuds in and was half asleep, lost in my music. A few stops into my ride, an entitled mom, EM, and her son, who looked to be about 10 years old, got on the bus. It was clear from the get-go that there were no seats available, but that didn't stop EM from scanning the bus like she was on a mission. She locked eyes with me and beelined in my direction. EM, in a tone that was more demanding than polite, said, "Excuse me, could you let my son sit down? He's really tired from his day and needs to sit." I was surprised she singled me out since there were other people, some elderly, standing as well. I was about to respond, maybe even stand up despite feeling exhausted myself, when a woman standing nearby, I'll call her helpful lady HL, spoke up. HL said in a kind but firm tone, "Ma'am, it's not right to single out someone for their seat. We're all tired after a long day. Perhaps your son can manage standing for a bit." EM's face turned a shade of red, and she responded, "But he's just a child and children need to sit, it's common courtesy." The bus was unusually silent, with everyone seemingly tuned into our conversation. HL, undeterred, replied, I understand. But so do the elderly, the disabled, and those who've had long days at work. We can't expect others to always give up their comfort for us. It's a valuable lesson in consideration and patience. EM looked ready to argue more, but seemed to realize that the bus audience wasn't on her side. She muttered something under her breath about rude people and moved slightly away, still standing. The rest of the ride was uneventful, but the atmosphere felt a bit charged. When my stop arrived, I got up, and as I passed HL, she gave me a small smile and a nod, as if to say, you did the right thing. I nodded back in gratitude, feeling relieved but also a bit surprised at how the situation unfolded. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.